Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Ostwalt. Ghosts, spirits, poltergeist. Our rational side might say they don't exist, but we still tend to be curious about and even fearful of ghosts and the paranormal. Ghosts have had a long history of haunting our religions and our beliefs. And here today with us is our very special own ghost hunter, Bill Butland, and Dr. Coung Mai of the Philosophy and Religion Department, who specializes in Buddhism and Chinese religions. So they're here to help us understand ghosts, what they are, and what role they play in religion. Welcome, Bill and Coung Mai.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So we've got two very different perspectives here, Bill. Is it okay to call you a ghost hunter? Or is that what you are?
Yeah.
All right. So you're out there and you're trying to find evidence of the paranormal.
Exactly.
And then Coung studies the appearance of ghosts in history and culture and religion. So it's going to be some nice interplay here. Bill, why don't you start by telling us what you're doing in one of our programs here on App TV called The Great Appalachian Ghost Hunt, right?
Right.
So tell us about this project.
The project started almost a year ago now, a little more than a year ago, when I was on a back road in Caldwell County, and I got lost, and I stopped near the Zahara Baker Memorial, and my car got cold inside, and then the seatbelt monitor went off as if somebody had just stepped into my car and sat down next to me. And the temperature in the car probably dropped by 20 degrees or so, and the music changed. It changed to a particular song, and that song would play every time the car started after that for weeks until I finally changed the CD. But that's what got me interested. And I had been watching the various shows on TV for a while now. And I always thought, they have these weekends that you can go and spend a weekend with them and have a ghost adventure. And I said, well, I'd like to have a ghost adventure of my own. And I was a member of the App TV community. And so I pitched the idea to Rob Gelber, who runs everything around here, and he thought it was a great idea, and we went from there.
So you had this experience of, and it sounds like a spirit actually sought you out, this experience you had in the car. Coung, is this kind of a common interaction that we find in the history of religions or ghost stories where someone is caught unaware this way?
Many of the ghost stories that I know of are ghosts of the dead who are unhappy or dissatisfied for some reason. And so there's oftentimes a distinction between the unhappy dead and the kind of satisfied dead. So they're kind of spirits that are friendly to us and a part of our family. So many different religious traditions will make that distinction.
And that's exactly, with the car situation, I didn't feel afraid. You know, I remember being 5 years old and going through the haunted house at Disney World and seeing the ghost in the mirror next to me and being afraid. But here I was in the car by myself, and I felt, rather than being afraid, I felt a calmness. I felt like it was looking for somebody to connect with.
Yeah. So ghosts don't have to be malevolent.
Right.
But those are the ones we tend to think about when we think about ghost stories or hauntings, I guess.
Right. I think we can think of ghosts as spirits in general, and there's a whole spectrum of different types of spirits in the spirit world. So different traditions and different culture would talk about different types of spirits, and ghosts are just one type of spirits. And they have as one type of cultural function, one type of religious function as well.
So by different spirits, you're distinguishing between ghosts and poltergeist, or there are other names for
ghosts, the spirits of the dead, spirits of malevolent beings, demonic spirits, the spirits of mountains, of trees, of forests, for example. These are other types of spirits that people have experience of. And
in these stories, these spirits inhabit other dimensions, parallel worlds? So how do we have encounters with these spirits? We're not talking about the afterlife here. We're talking
Right.
about spirits that exist here and now.
Well, from what I've seen in terms of the history of religions worldwide, there are many different ways of encountering. There are certain zones within our reality where the spirit realm intersects. So, for example, in the wilds, in the woods, when we're faced with awesome natural phenomena, or places where there's an intersection of the living and the dead, such as graveyards, or places where people have died, hospitals, for example, or crossroads, where accidents frequently happen, are said to be a place where you can encounter the unhappy dead, which is those people who died unnatural deaths or before their time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned hospitals as one of the intersections between the living and the dead. And that takes us back to, Bill, something you're working with here. After your experience in the car and you pursued this program, tell us about your experience in the haunted hospital.
So somebody mentioned to me that there was a haunted hospital in Banner Elk, and and people were sneaking into it because there's a nice big sign on the hospital itself that says "Keep out, private property."
Yeah.
So I actually tracked down the owner, and we got permission to go in. He gave us permission to go in for an entire day, and we did almost the entire day. And there was a group of us. There must have been 12, maybe. And we explored every inch of that hospital. And some of the things that happened were remarkable. We went back a second time because we're trying to scientifically recreate what happened the first time. And we didn't get quite the reaction the second time. And I believe that's because we didn't have the same people. I think somebody in the original group really brought out whatever was going on in there. The second time around, though, I experienced a man walking in the hallway with me. I was sitting in the room with the door that slammed, and I was on the inside waiting for the door to slam for an hour. And finally I came out and I walked the hallway, and the hallway crunches because the ceiling tiles have all fallen to the ground. And I heard a repeat crunch behind me. And I turned around as quick as I could, and I snapped off as many pictures. And I believe they're going to show the picture later.
We have that image you can show.
Yeah, there's a man standing at the end of the hall in the picture, and he's looking right at me. And as soon as that picture was taken, I heard a boom, 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 like the door had just shut.
Right.
And it really shook me. And we had set up our camp in the chapel, which was about 100 yards ahead, so I could see the lights. And so I turned on my flashlight. I had 2 flashlights. I had both flashlights on, and I hurried back because that was one time that really scared me.
This actually terrified you, unlike your experience in the car where you
Right. Yeah. This I felt. This I felt was malevolent.
Right. Huh. So I know you're going to be met with a lot of skepticism. So the skeptic would say, "Oh, you heard your own footsteps reverberating in the hallway, or you saw a shadow and not a real ghost." So I would imagine that you kind of engage this sort of skepticism all the time. So,
Right. Yeah, I do. It does happen, but all I can tell you is what I saw.
Sure.
And I have the picture, and people can pick apart the picture as much as they want. I can tell you the feeling that I had there, and it felt like, almost like darkness surrounding me.
Right.
And we later went to, there's a little girl's room in there where a little girl had passed away, apparently. These are the legends of the hospital. That
Right.
We were exploring the legends of the hospital. We had researched it first. And so in 402, a little girl apparently had passed away. And so on our second trip, we placed a ball in the room. And this is one of the few rooms that didn't have broken windows. And we placed the ball in the room with a candle, and we tried to get her to move the ball. And after about 45 minutes or so, the ball finally did start moving on its own. We kicked it around the room, we played with it, and then we set it down just a few inches from the candle, and the candle, we said, please, show us that you're here. And the candle started going crazy, and again, the doors were shut, windows were shut, no breeze at all. It was dead still, excuse the word.
Yeah.
But the ball started moving a little to the left, and then it started moving to the right, and then it made like, it didn't completely move all the way around, but it was trying,
Right.
whatever it was.
Well, something you said will interest me, and I'll get Coung's reaction to this. You said that on your first trip, there must have been someone in the group who seemed to be more receptive to the spiritual world, or who drew the spirits out.
Right.
And we were talking earlier, Coung, that this is a kind of a common thing, right? And particularly in religious stories that have to deal with ghosts, that there seem to be certain people who are more in tune to the paranormal experience. Could you comment on that a bit?
When we look at the different world religions, different traditions in the world, we find that there's often the case that certain people have some kind of inborn inherent nature, it is believed, to be able to cross dimensions and experience either spirits or these dissatisfied ghosts.
Do these people know that they have that, or is this something that they discover by accident?
There are many different traditions. One common tradition that you hear about, especially with shamanism, is that at roughly the age of puberty, the young person, oftentimes a woman, a female, undergoes a series of sicknesses, illnesses, inexplicable illnesses, until she has a dream of some type in which a spirit goes to her and says, you have this talent or you have this ability, and you have to face it, or else something catastrophic will happen to you. And then the young person would go to a shaman or shamaness and then learn the arts and the skills of controlled communication, I would say, with the other dimension.
That's fascinating. Well, we have a little short video, about a minute long, and I think this is something that you helped produce, Bill.
Yeah.
If we could get this up on the screen and watch this video, and then we can comment on that. And while we're getting that ginned up, I wanted to ask Coung, and this was something we talked about earlier. You mentioned that oftentimes it's a woman, a female, who has this kind of connection. Is that the case in religions, that women tend to be more in tune with the shamanistic talent, I guess you would call it?
That seems to be the case, and there are many different scholars who've tried to provide explanations for why it tends to be women. And so there are political explanations. There's, from the Chinese perspective, there's this idea that women have what's called a yin nature. A yin nature is one it resonates more with the realm of darkness, because yin means feminine, dark. So,
right.
So the world of light and dark is understood as the world of the living is the world of light, of sunshine, of light, and the world of the dead, of the spirits, the world of the dark. And women tend to have more of a yin nature, for example. That's just one
right.
cultural explanation.
Yeah. All right, let's watch this short video clip,
Okay.
Bill.
After watching this light anomaly many, many times, I've come to determine that it's unexplainable. It is a light anomaly. And not only that, but if you listen at the end when it ducks into the door, it makes a sound. It makes a sound like it's hitting something. It starts at the floor, it follows up the light, where it gets brighter, up his arm, and then it shoots into the door. It is not a lens flare. What we saw in that video was, and it was an instant replay. We replayed it about 3 times. And that was actually Will, who's working the crew today on our show, walked into a room with a light, and there was an extra light that came down the hallway, and it literally appeared out of nowhere. And of course, when I posted it, we got a lot of people saying, that's just lens flare. But the odd thing about what that was it was a piece of light that followed him into the room. It went up into the light that he's holding, and then it passed up through his arm, and then it stopped in midair, took a sharp left-hand turn, and it went into the door, and it made a sound. It went, and I played it 100 times, trying to figure out what it is. And people keep saying it's lens flare, but it makes a sound at the end of it, and it makes an unusual stop and a turn, which I've never seen a lens flare do in my life.
So you are trying to measure these phenomena, even though we talk about the numinous in religion and the paranormal, but you're trying to use science in order to get some empirical measurements,
Right.
Using various equipment to photograph. And you brought a couple of things here. I thought maybe you could explain to me what this odd-looking thing here is.
This odd-looking thing, and it actually works. It is it's brightly marked ghost meter on it, but it is actually an EMF meter, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do, even though it does have a little humor to it by calling it a ghost meter. It measures the electromagnetic power in a room. So if you're in a room with a ghost that's giving off some electromagnetic waves, you're going to pick it up with this device. And when we were on the original ghost hunt and we were in the final room, and there was a group, I wasn't with the group, I was down at the base station, but they had this running and the cameras were all out for whatever reason. But the one thing you hear on the sound, and the sound from the room is quite compelling. But the one thing you hear on the sound throughout the whole thing is this going beep, 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 beep. I mean, and they all came out and they're like, it was redlining the whole time. It was redlining the whole time.
So it picks up electromagnetic.
Yeah.
What do you think, Coung? Does that make sense that there would be anomalies like this in the presence of a spirit?
From my point of view, it's fascinating because, I mean, what it does is, on the one hand, it really questions our uses, our categories to understand the world of spirits, because when we look at the history of religions, what we see is the distinction between, let's say, matter and spirit is not really used all the time. One more common distinction that I find is matter, spirit, and energy, meaning that certain people can resonate, and it's not because of their matter, for example, but it's because of somehow they have some nature within them that's able to perceive other types of, not spirit, but more of some type of vibration or energy field or aura, for example. So that kind of language is reaching towards this idea of categories beyond merely the dualistic categories of matter and spirit. So I think that's quite fascinating. I mean, if you could try to maybe do an experiment where someone who makes the claim of being able to perceive spirits or paranormal phenomena and then just trigger this with some electromagnetic field that you actually control, and have a controlled experiment to see if people actually can perceive wavelengths or energy fields that other people can't. You know, that's one type of experiment.
So you're really talking about expanding the boundaries of the way we perceive reality.
Right.
we normally, particularly in the West, we think about material versus spiritual, that kind of, as you mentioned, dualistic system. But here we're talking about energy, which is another kind of way of measuring reality.
Right. And you mentioned skepticism. When I look at the history of religions and religious constructions, cultural constructions and stories about ghosts, there's always skepticism. There's always a strain of skepticism. And it seems as if one of the interesting things that I've seen is this idea that different cultures will talk about ghosts differently and try to manage this skepticism differently. And what I find interesting is in our contemporary culture, that's always dominated by science, the authority of science.
Yeah.
In other historical periods, it's not really the authority of science, it's maybe the authority of the church. You know, spirits do exist, but some are good, some are not. Maybe you shouldn't have communication with them.
Right.
Yeah.
You should leave them alone because you run the risk of bringing the demonic into the world, right? Yeah, so that's fascinating. But yeah, so this thing of ghost stories that fascinate us as children and as adults, and it's one of the most universal experiences, it seems to me, of the human.
It's, you know, you grow up with campfire stories.
Yeah, yeah.
And sitting around with the Boy Scouts, and sometimes you just can't shake it. It stays with you.
Yeah, yeah. Or in Chinese religions, populated by these ghost stories as well. And you tend to connect it to the idea of ancestor veneration, and that's something that you suggested that permeates all kinds of religions and human experiences.
That's why I think that these stories are fascinating for so many reasons. Intrinsically fascinating, but also when you look at them, when you try to move away from them and just, regardless of whether or not they're true per se, but the cultural, the social work that they do is so fascinating because in that sense, I think we'll have ghost stories forever because we'll always have dead people. People will die. And so we'll constantly think about the dead. Even after they're gone, they're still in some way in our psyche, and it has to be expressed in some way. And when we share them, they have a certain reality to them.
The one thing that happened on our second trip was we all went back into the room where the porcelain was thrown and nothing happened. And that's why I think that somebody from the original trip triggered it.
Right.
But while we were in that room, we heard a full-blown conversation between two women standing outside the door. And there were 5 of us in the room, and we stopped, and the girl, we all said, "Do you hear that?" And I said, "Wait, don't say what it is." And so we whispered to each other what we heard, and it was a conversation between 2 women. So we pulled open the door as fast as we could, and there was nothing there. But it was a conversation. Wow. We heard 2 people talking.
Well, this has been fascinating. I think the work you're doing, Bill, look forward to seeing more of it. And Coung, you've added a nice perspective here. Think maybe you're going to take a trip with him one of these times.
Yeah, I've invited.
But anyway, so ghost stories are always going to be with us. Thank you for coming today and talking about the role these stories play in our religions and in our religious imagination. And thank you for joining us on Religion and Life here at App TV. I want to thank our guests, Dr. Coung Mai and Bill Butland, for stopping by this week. On the next episode of Religion and Life, we'll be out of the studio and visiting 2 Ashe County churches that have famous frescoes by the artist Ben Long. We hope you'll join us for this special edition of Religion and Life. Until next time, this is Ozzie Ostwalt.